Good morning and welcome to Hoofing It in the Morning, the show for everyone hoofing it to work and trying to make sense of the day ahead. My name is Spider Hoof and I'll be taking you through the headlines, hot takes and moments that make you say, hang on, what? So grab your coffee, keep moving, and let's get into it. First on the list, we need to talk about the political scandal that may have accidentally become the best free advertising campaign of the year. Stuff has run a story on the social media account called Luxury Marmite Sandwich, and their angle is the account belongs to a former Labour staffer. Yep, they hunted down a social media content creator just because they used to work for Labour. Whoop-de-doo, people used to work for Labour, not even remotely a big journalism scoop. If you don't know, Luxury Marmite Sandwich is a very clever content creator. Their videos are sharp and very funny, and although they are bang on the money with the point of view they have, it is clearly political satire. But the reaction shows this current government is incredibly thin-skinned. Chasing Chris Hipkins over something allegedly run by someone who used to work for Labour is not serious politics. It is a lame goose hunt. And the funniest part? It has backfired. Before this, plenty of people had probably never heard of Luxury Marmite Sandwich. Now, the account is sitting around 24,000 followers, up from recent reports of about 21,800. That is not a takedown. That is a free advertising subscriber boost and a win. Now it's time for Speech of the Day. On the 29th of May, Kieran McNulty gave one of the best speeches of the year. I have linked it below, but I have only brought it up because of this comment he made.
I want to thank the members of the National Party for voting for Chris Luxon because we're very happy that he is there. We are very happy that he is there because the more that New Zealanders see from Christopher Luxon, the less they like, the more they start to realise that this government is empty, it has nothing. If it's not written in front of them, they don't know what to say. It was on display in question time today. Andy Foster got given an additional supplementary question from the Speaker and he didn't know what to say because no one had written it down for him. He just sat there like a deer in the headlights.
So of course I had to look up what he was talking about, and the Andy Foster flustering bit is indeed very funny. But what is not funny is every one of the words Shane Jones uses in his speech. Take a listen to this.
Question 5, Andy Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question...
When the House is ready to give you the respect of the question.
My question
Andy
is
Foster.
to the Minister of Regional Development and asks, what recent announcements has he made?
The Honourable Shane Jones.
Obviously, we have already announced the recommissioning of the 100 million litre tank and the diesel that will go into that tank, but we are also pursuing a strategy with a suitable regime, legislatively speaking, and a high-quality, large event to lay out a roadmap and a strategy for hydrogen. That is something that will join the host of other announcements I've made in terms of geothermal, nuclear fission, and oil and gas. We are going in our regions to ensure that we have the supply of energy by using our regional resources, including hydrogen.
Supplementary.
Andy Foster.
Supplementary. Does New Zealand have potential for hydrogen being a fuel of choice?
Mr. Speaker, being very interested in clean green outcomes, I think it's very important that we join with the different stakeholders in our community and explore the role that hydrogen can play in boosting our fuel resilience, our energy resilience, coming off the afflictions associated with the Persian Gulf military conflict. It is important, however, that when people apply for innocuous prospecting permits, that they are not pilloried, they are not cancelled, they are not harassed by opponents to mining when they are legally entitled to go and get an innocuous permit to learn about the potential of hydrogen and other minerals on the Dock estate. And watch this space.
Just remind members that filming inside the House is not something that's permitted. Andy Foster.
No, that was up.
Oh, no more questions? Well, Andy Foster. Okay.
I know that.
No.
Touche.
No,
E noho.
3 second rule, son. Missed it. Question number 6.
That was a great fumble by Andy Foster. But what Shane Jones is talking about is a commentary on how the current government can aptly be named the Ministry of Misery. I will skip over the talk of nuclear fission. I very much believe that is a red herring and a cheap way to draw attention away from the real issue. Hydrogen sounds clean, doesn't it? The Luxon government says it wants to unlock natural and orange hydrogen in New Zealand. Hydrogen found underground or created underground through chemical reactions. Shane Jones says it could be a game changer for energy resilience and economic growth. But here is the bit they do not put in the shiny press release. This is not just about clean green science. This is about opening up the ground. It is about drilling, exploration, permits, industrial roads, heavy machinery, water risks, habitat disturbance, and long-term damage to landscapes that do not grow back in a 3-year election cycle. And this government is not just looking at ordinary industrial land. Under Christopher Luxon, the government has been pushing a wider mining expansion, including on conservation land. The Minister for Regional Development, Shane Jones, has openly argued that not all conservation land is equal, and he has defended mining expansion even while environmental groups warn it threatens biodiversity, freshwater, protected species, and fragile ecosystems. And then comes the real kicker. A prospecting permit was approved within Te Waipunamu, one of New Zealand's UNESCO World Heritage Sites. That permit reportedly covered 157 square kilometres and allowed prospecting for all minerals except uranium. After public backlash, the bid was later withdrawn, but the fact it got that far should alarm everyone. World Heritage Sites, conservation land, native species, waterways, places we tell the world are priceless, suddenly treated like a spreadsheet for overseas extraction companies. And for what? The government's own mineral strategy talks about doubling mineral exports to $3 billion by 2035. That sounds big until you ask, how much stays here? How many permanent jobs are actually created? And who wears the environmental cost when the company leaves? Even the mining boom sales pitch is thin. Reports on the fast-track mining push have pointed out that Jones's $3 billion target is aspirational, and experts have warned the economic benefits are uncertain because commodity prices change, foreign investment can be hard to tax properly, and mining can boom and bust. So we risk permanent damage for temporary jobs, low public return, and profits that will only flow offshore. And while all this is happening, Shane Jones has been personally meeting with mining interests. In 2024, he came under fire over an undeclared dinner with mining bosses, where the government's fast-track consenting process was discussed. Reporting said his office scheduled the dinner, and Labour later said executives from Bathurst Resources and Federation Mining attended, so let's call it what it looks like. They are selling it as energy security. They are dressing it up as innovation. They are using the language of jobs and growth, but underneath it is the same old deal: public land, private profit, low accountability, and environmental damage that communities are left to live with. Hydrogen might have a place in the future, but drilling into conservation land and flirting with World Heritage Sites is not a clean energy plan. It is extraction politics with a green label slapped on the front. It should be made a criminal offence. Speaking of criminals, last week it was reported one of the most notorious double murders of all time has died. Betty Broderick has died in prison at 78, decades after the murders of her ex-husband Dan Broderick and his new wife, Linda Cole Keena Broderick. And with her death, the whole debate has started again. Was Betty a victim pushed too far, or was she a murderer who spent decades trying to justify the unjustifiable? Because if you only watch Dirty John, the Betty Broderick story, or the older TV movie A Woman Scorned, you might come away thinking this was mostly a story about a betrayed wife, a cruel husband, and a divorce system stacked against her. And yes, Dan Broderick did appear to be controlling, manipulative, and financially ruthless during the divorce. But the part that gets softened is all of Betty's outrageous behaviour and the very nice lifestyle she had before she walked into Dan and Linda's home while they were asleep, shot them in their bed, ripped the phone from the wall, and left them to die. For those unsure of the story, here is a quick timeline of events. 1965, Betty and Dan meet at a Catholic college event. He is ambitious, focused, and already planning a high-status professional future. She is also ambitious. She aspired to get a degree and have the perfect family life. 1969, Betty and Dan marry. They are young, Catholic, and building the life they had been told to want. Marriage, children, career, respectability. 1970. Their first child is born. Dan completes medical school at Cornell, but instead of practicing medicine, he decides to go to law school because with his medical degree and a law degree, he believed he would earn more as a lawyer. And she fully supported this. She also understood the wealth that would come from this path. Throughout the early 1970s, this is their broke student era. Betty is raising children, working, supporting the household, and helping Dan get through years of expensive education. 1973, Dan graduates from Harvard Law School. This is the major turning point. The couple moves to San Diego, and Dan begins building a legal career. Mid to late 1970s, Dan's career starts taking off. He becomes a medical malpractice lawyer, which is powerful because he has both a medical degree and a law degree. The family moves from struggling student life into serious wealth. By 1980, Betty and Dan have 4 children. From the outside, they look like the American success story. Big house, money, status, children, and he is a rising legal superstar. Early 1980s, Betty suspects Dan is having an affair with Linda. Dan denies it. This is a point that people talk about a lot, whether or not Dan did have eyes for Linda and did indeed intend to have an affair, or if Betty's actions and constant accusations, which included harassing both Dan and Linda, actually drew to the couple together in a shared trauma kind of way. We won't ever know the truth, but the future relationship between Dan and Linda becomes central to the collapse of the marriage. 1982, Dan hires Linda Kolkner, a young former flight attendant, as his assistant. This is where the marriage starts to fracture badly. 1985, Dan moves out and files for divorce. What follows is not a clean split. It becomes one of the ugliest, most public divorce battles in San Diego. 1985 to 1989, the divorce war drags on. Betty leaves abusive phone messages, ignores restraining orders, vandalizes Dan's property, and even drives her car into his house. Dan gains custody of the children, and Betty claims he uses his money, legal knowledge, and influence against her. January 1989. The divorce is finalized. Betty does receive money. Dan is ordered to pay her $16,000 a month in spousal support, about $193,200 a year at the time. In today's money, that is roughly $42,000 a month, or more than $500,000 a year. Betty claims she was not paid enough. April 1989, Dan marries Linda. Linda is reportedly worried enough about Betty that she urges Dan to wear a bulletproof vest to the wedding. He refuses, but security is used. November 5th, 1989. 7 months after Dan and Linda marry, Betty uses a key taken from her daughter to enter their home while they are asleep. She shoots them both in bed. Dan and Linda die. After the murders, Betty calls people and admits what happened. Her boyfriend, at the time Bradley Wright, is pulled into the aftermath after Betty tells a friend she shot Dan. Wright and one of Dan's friends go to the house and discover the bodies. Wright later testifies that Betty had spoken about wanting to kill Dan. And their relationship did not just end there. After Betty went to prison, Wright stayed in contact with her. Reports say he visited her, sent care packages, helped look after her property, and put around $150 a month into her prison account for extras. Later, prison love letters surfaced where Betty was reportedly begging him for money and affection. So when the dramatized version paints Betty almost entirely as an abandoned woman, it leaves out something important. She had money, she had a boyfriend, and she had support. None of that means Dan was perfect. None of that means the divorce was fair. But it does mean the poor Betty had nothing and no one version is not honest. At the center of the story are 2 dead people, Dan Broderick and Linda Broderick. Linda was not a plot device. Dan was not just the cheating husband. They were both killed in their bed, and Betty Broderick spent the rest of her life in prison, still insisting in one way or another that she had been the real victim. That is why the TV version bothers me. It gives you the drama. It gives you the betrayal. It gives you the courtroom chaos. But it does not fully sit with the reality. Betty Broderick did not just lose control. She loaded a gun, entered a home, and murdered 2 sleeping people. And for that crime, she rightly spent the remainder of her life behind bars. Not simply because that was her sentence. Betty was eligible for parole several times, but she was repeatedly denied release because she refused to fully take accountability. She still insisted that she was the real victim, rather than Dan and Linda, the two people she murdered. Now, back to the Ministry of Misery, otherwise known as the current coalition government, and their $2.7 billion spending spree. The $2 billion helicopter spend up. And what New Zealand could have done instead, this government has repeatedly told every New Zealander there was no money. No money for free prescriptions for everyone. No money for cheap public transport for kids and young people. No money to keep the first home grant. No money to properly fund social services, climate programs, disability supports, or public services without cuts. But apparently, there is money for war toys, because the government has budgeted more than $2 billion to replace the Navy's Sea Sprite helicopters with 5 MH-60R Seahawk maritime helicopters, manufactured by Lockheed Martin's Sikorsky unit in the United States. The Ministry of Defence says formal discussions are underway, with final decisions expected in 2026, and that the more than $2 billion figure includes not just the aircraft, but training, support equipment, spares, and infrastructure needed to bring them into service. Reuters reported the wider aircraft package as 2.7 billion New Zealand dollars. 2 billion New Zealand dollars for the helicopters and 700 million New Zealand dollars for 2 Airbus A321 XLR aircraft to replace the aging Boeing 757s. The helicopters are being pursued through the United States Foreign Military Sales Program rather than a wider tender. And this is not happening in isolation. Budget 2025 included a $4.2 billion defence package with $957 million for NZDF operating funding over 4 years and $2.7 billion in capital, plus $563 million operating funding for major defence projects. So the question is not, do helicopters exist? The question is, why is a small country in a cost of living crisis spending billions on military hardware while cutting social good at home? This smells like sucking up to Trump. So what is the government buying? The government's preferred option is the MH-60R Seahawk, a maritime combat helicopter used by Australia, the United States, and other defence partners. The Ministry of Defence says it would replace the current SH-2G-1 Sea Sprite fleet and would be interoperable with allies and able to contribute to multinational coalition missions. That word matters, interoperable. It does not just mean good for New Zealand, it means fits neatly into allied military operations. So when ministers sell this as search and rescue, disaster response, and maritime surveillance, that is only part of the story. These are also combat-capable helicopters bought from a major US weapons manufacturer through the US military sales pipeline. And the government's own defence capability plan is not just about rescue or patrol. It talks about boosting strike capability, missile systems, longer range maritime power, and responding to a deteriorating security environment. Reuters reported that New Zealand has pledged 9 billion New Zealand dollars over 4 years to boost defence spending and move toward 2% of GDP. So let's call it what it is. New Zealand is being moved further into a militarised US-aligned defence posture. And I, for one, do not think we need to be part of it, but you let me know in the comments your thoughts on it. New Zealand is not the United States. We are not Australia. We are not a global military power. We are a small country with a housing crisis, a health crisis, underfunded schools, food insecurity, growing unemployment, and families choosing between medicine, petrol, rent, and food. So when the government says we need $2 billion helicopters, the obvious response is, for what? New Zealand does need maritime surveillance. New Zealand does need search and rescue. New Zealand does need disaster response. New Zealand does need fisheries protection and Pacific support. We already have 4 brand new Boeing P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, a contract that costs the taxpayers $2.3 billion. So where is the real justification in purchasing a $2 billion combat-capable helicopter package bought through the US military system while the same government is cutting or shrinking programs that directly help ordinary people? That is the political choice here. Every dollar spent on military hardware is a dollar not spent on housing, health, food, transport, disability support, climate resilience, or poverty reduction. Let's put $2 billion into real-world terms. 1. It could have funded free prescriptions for years. The previous government removed the standard $5 prescription co-payment from 1st July 2023. Treasury documents say that universal removal was funded at $706.746 million across the forecast period. Budget 2024 then considered reintroducing the co-payment with exemptions, returning $116.143 million in net savings to the centre. So instead of spending $2 billion plus on helicopters, the government could have funded free prescriptions for everyone for years. That means fewer people skipping medication, fewer people rationing inhalers, antibiotics, blood pressure medication, antidepressants, or pain relief. Fewer people ending up sicker and more expensive to treat later. That is real security, not military security, human security. 2. It could have kept public transport cheaper for children and young people. The government removed funding for free public transport for children aged 5 to 12 and half-price fares for young people aged 13 to 24. Auckland Transport said those concessions ended on 30 April 2024, in line with the government's decision to withdraw funding, affecting about 200,000 registered HOP card users in Auckland alone. Budget documents show the removal of free fares for 5 to 12-year-olds and half-price fares for 13 to 24-year-olds returned about $265.212 million over the forecast period. So $2 billion could have paid for that program many times over. Instead, young people got higher transport costs while Defence gets helicopters. That is not a budgeting accident. That is a value statement. 3. It could have kept the First Home Grant budget 2024, ended the First Home Grant scheme, which provided deposit support for eligible first home buyers. Treasury's budget 2024 documents describe the funding as being returned because the scheme was ceasing. The documents show savings of $245 million from the First Home Grant scheme across the forecast period. So for a fraction of the helicopter money, the government could have kept helping first home buyers with deposits. Instead, young people are told to work harder, save harder, and stop complaining, while billions go to military procurement. 4. It could have protected school lunches from cuts and shrinking. The Healthy School Lunches program feeds students in need. The Ministry of Education says Budget 2024 provided $478 million to continue the program for 2 more years. But social service analysis of Budget 2024 noted that while the program continued, savings of approximately $107 million were expected through changes to the high school program, including changes to menus, suppliers, and preparation. So again, the government can find more than $2 billion for helicopters, but school lunches get squeezed. And what does that mean in real life? It means poorer food, more pressure on schools, more hungry kids, more parents trying to stretch money they do not have. A fed child is a safer investment than a war helicopter. 5. It could have protected climate and environment programs. Budget 2024 documents show major savings from climate-related funding. The budget included a climate dividend, including the closure of Climate Emergency Response Fund funding. That's right. While we are witnessing unprecedented weather events, this government stopped the Climate Emergency Response Fund. Treasury documents also show funding reduced from areas such as waste minimisation, native afforestation, 3D coastal mapping, and transport funding previously pre-committed against climate-related land transport priorities. This matters because New Zealand's real security threat is not an invasion fleet. It is flooding, cyclones, sea level rise, broken roads, destroyed homes, insurance costs skyrocketing, food supply shocks, infrastructure collapse. If the government cared about national security, climate resilience would be treated as national security. Instead, climate programs are cut while military hardware gets fast-tracked. 6. It could have avoided some of the public service cuts. Budget 2024 openly states that tax relief was funded by savings and revenue measures. The budget at a glance shows $3.68 billion for tax relief, funded by $3.71 billion in savings and revenue, plus further savings to fund core services. Reuters reported in 2024 that the Ministry of Education planned to cut about 565 full-time jobs, around 12% of its workforce, as part of a wider public sector downsizing drive, with departments asked to find savings of 6.5 to 7.5%. So the government can say back office all at once. But those cuts affect the machinery that delivers services: policy advice, education support, public health planning, housing delivery, disability systems, climate response, compliance, monitoring, regional support. You cannot hollow out the public sector and then act surprised when services fall over. The government wants us to believe security means helicopters, missiles, surveillance aircraft, and alignment with US military procurement. But for most New Zealanders, security means something very different. Security is being able to afford to live, pay for food, bills and housing. It's about making sure they can raise their children to be the best they can be. It's about knowing if you get sick, you won't go bankrupt in the process. But under this government, all of that is at risk. The cost of living crisis is far worse now than it has ever been, and the unemployment rate is through the roof. So here is my issue with the $2 billion helicopter spend. It is not that New Zealand should have no defence force. It is not that old equipment never needs replacing. It is not that search and rescue, maritime patrol, and disaster response do not matter. They do. But there are a lot more important things right now. And $2 billion could sure help a lot of people. And that is before we even get to the wider defence package. $9 billion over the coming years, more military alignment, more talk of strike capability, more procurement from overseas defence giants. So do not tell us this is just about safety. Safety would be making life livable for the people already here. Instead, New Zealand is being asked to accept austerity at home and militarisation abroad. We are told to accept cuts to public services, cuts to transport support, cuts to climate funding, cuts to housing support, and cuts to everyday cost of living help. But at the same time, billions are being lined up for helicopters, military aircraft, and defence expansion. That is not fiscal discipline. That is a political choice. And in my view, it is a waste of money for New Zealand. Because a country of 5 million people does not become safer by copying the priorities of military superpowers. It becomes safer by making sure its people are housed, fed, healthy, educated, mobile, resilient, and able to live with dignity. So when they say $2 billion for helicopters, ask them, how else could we spend that money better? And why does this government think helicopters matter more than people? Well, that is enough of the Ministry of Misery talk. I am going to end this on something a little bit lighter, and that is my movie review of the day. So I watched Send Help, the new survival thriller / dark comedy starring Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien, directed by Sam Raimi. And honestly, I didn't love it. There were some genuinely funny parts. I especially love the dark humour, and you can see what the film is trying to do. Office politics, power games, gender dynamics, survival panic, and two people who absolutely should not be stuck together. The basic plot is two colleagues survive a plane crash and end up stranded on a deserted island, where old workplace tensions and personal resentments start turning into a battle of wills. But for me, it just did not fully land, particularly the last quarter of the movie. I do think Rachel McAdams is still incredibly watchable. I like her. I have always liked her. She has natural screen presence, and she can do comedy, drama, charm, awkwardness, a menace when the role gives her something good to work with. But that is also my issue, her film choices. Because when you think of Rachel McAdams, you think of Mean Girls, you think of The Notebook, you think of that era where she was picking films that became part of pop culture. Even her smaller roles had impact. And now I find myself watching something like Send Help thinking, I like you, I want you to win. I just wish you would pick better films again. Because she is not the problem with this movie. If anything, she is one of the reasons it is watchable. Some critics have actually praised her performance, and even the mixed reviews seem to agree that she lifts the material. But a good performance does not automatically make a good film. For me, Send Help had a fun idea, a good cast, and a few genuinely funny moments. But it also felt uneven, and by the end, I was not as invested as the film wanted me to be. It is one of those movies where I can see why other people might enjoy it more than I did, but for me, It was a miss. Not terrible, not unwatchable, just a little disappointing. And mostly, it made me think Rachel McAdams deserves a proper role. Not just a role where she does her best with weird material, but a film that reminds everyone why she became such a star in the first place. So my review is some funny parts, decent performance, interesting idea, but overall, send help, because this movie needed a stronger script. And that is all I have to say about that. If you enjoyed listening, make sure you tune in for more. If you have a topic you want covered or can recommend a good movie, comment below. I am Spider Hoof, and I hope you have a great day.